of a quiet dude, though. You know, he's kind of. I mean, I don't know that he is quiet, but he's been somewhat quiet. Really talk to him much.
He takes his time.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, is he?
Observer.
Yeah. Ben's kind of that way.
Hey, Lex.
Let's keep this one real sexy though. Last time I don't keep it real sexy.
For pride and exaltation, be the love, be the love. Oh. Be the hope for the children's salvation, be the peace for the nation's reconciliation, be the life that says yes to all creation, be the love.
Welcome. I'm normally at the 5 o'clock, but I just wanted to come and make a couple special announcements. A couple things. If you have given a donation all in 2012, we have envelopes for you out in the family room on the table there, so you can grab the envelope. They're in alphabetical order, so grab that before you go, so then I can save stamps. And also for the building fund, a lot of you know that we've been kind of plugging for a building fund campaign over the next 3 years, and we are trying to raise $625,000, and we have currently raised $220,000. But we want people to know that we still have this white form around the corner of the info bar that you can fill out to pledge a certain amount over the course of 3 years, whether it be monthly, one-time gift, and that will just continue in the future coming months to invite people, covenant participants, non-covenant participants, people to make a contribution and contribute in that way. And then also, our fiscal year runs April through March, and so we're in our last quarter of our fiscal year, which means we have to start thinking about our next fiscal year, which starts in April. And so we have these yellow forms, which I have strategically placed next to giving statements, and we'll be out over the next couple weeks here, over this next month, where we'll be kind of called like a pledge drive, I guess you could say, where you'll be hearing about making a pledge, and we have a goal of $220,000. This last fiscal year, we have a pledge commitment of $211,000. So we're asking for an increase of an additional $9,000 over the course of the next year from current covenant participants and non-covenant participants and new people in the community, maybe who've been coming in the last year but haven't become a covenant participant, and you want to make that commitment. This is a really good time to enter into that and join our community in giving financially. So these will be out here over the next weeks. You'll be hearing people popping up and talking about it. So if you have any questions, come find me. Like I said, usually at 5, but you can email me, and I'm the one that sends a weekly email. So if you email that email address that you get, the Solomon's Porch email, you email that back, that comes to me. So I'm everywhere. So thank you.
Janelle, as you know, you're here, we meet at 7 o'clock, including next week. And you might say, well, why? What did that include next week? There's a football game that in 1969 became a big deal. And many people organized some social gatherings around that. And so once a year, we have a dilemma. What do we do on the Sunday night when the other national religion is calling people to worship? So we're just going to still meet if people are here, and if they're not, because at some point in the life of this church, people will just stop coming, and then we'll just stop doing it. So that could be 7 o'clock tomorrow, at least for a week. Like if there's not enough of us, then we'll just go eat, and if there are enough of us, then we'll have a gathering. So if you really want to have a gathering, bring somebody with you. If you really don't, there's get-togethers with the people who are hosting. In fact, are any of you hosting a Super Bowl get-together next week? Any of you? Okay. I was going to say, because others of you might want to go to that person's get-together. Yeah. But it's bigger than sport. It is. How many of you are going to a Super Bowl thing next week? Anybody going to a Super Bowl party next week? Oh, okay. Well, we'll see some of you next week. And we do lots of things in our community. At the 5 o'clock gathering, we got to meet Mateo de la Cruz Castellano, who is Chris and Leticia's little sweetie, little 2-week-old. So we had them stand up, and then we had his friends come around him. He's only had friends for a while, so he's 2 weeks old. And then the rest of the community stand up, and we took a little of the oil that Sarah McAtee has curated for us, frankincense oil, and anointed different parts of his body, asking for God's blessing in his mind, that his eyes would see God's glory, his ears would hear God's words, that his hands would do God's work, that his heart would be God's home, that his feet would follow wherever God leads him. And we asked the community to join together. And you are part of that, even though you've come into this room later in the night. So little Mateo is part of our community and was introduced to the rest of us tonight. And he's a sweet little peanut. Heather Lynn added a little song as a part of that blessing, which was really nice. So. It was Corey's idea?
Yeah.
Thanks, Corey. So it seems like now there's a little song that we have that goes with that blessing. Well, it's not a tradition yet unless you do it right now. How did that little refrain go?
It goes, the greatest inheritance of love in the world. World wasn't for it.
Isn't that great? Sometimes you have to sing it to know it.
Yeah.
That's just a truism in life. Like, there's just something about the truth of that we should remember.
In the water and the word is here now for you. The greatest assurance of the Father's devotion. He seals you with His Spirit. A child of God you are, a child of God you are. And there's a couple more verses too. There's one for each person of the Trinity.
And where did this come from, this song?
I wrote this song when I was thinking a lot about baptism. And in the background, I grew up in it, and then I was working in a Lutheran church for a while, and it's kind of part of my emancipation journey in really beginning to believe that there was no but after God's unconditional love. Like, God's love really could be bigger than even my own. And so that's where the song came from.
Can you just do that little refrain for us as a way to be connected to Mateo's?
I don't have the music in front of me, but
Greatest inheritance of love in the world, in the water and the word, is here now for you. The greatest assurance of the Father's devotion
some of you may not know this about me, but I'm kind of an amateur chef. I really enjoy cooking for my family, cooking for my extended family. I often say that if I could find someone that would be willing to clean my whole house, I'd be willing to host Thanksgiving every year. The point is that that's kind of how I look at communion around here. It's like a big family meal. We all get together, have a little bread, a little conversation, a little grape juice, and it's just a nice little time of the week. So anyway, we've got a couple of stations, as some of you may know. Looks like one over here, one back here. There's a common cup over here. There's some wine over here, and I guess before we have our meal, we've got to have our grace. We take communion by serving and eating bread and wine together in community with followers of Jesus around the world and throughout all ages. We enter this mystery proclaiming and having faith of Jesus as the Messiah, whose life, death, burial, resurrection, ascension, and ascending show the love of God to the world, free us from sin, and initiate the kingdom of God in our world in new ways for the benefit and blessing of all the world.
aches and body aches. Try to hold the cold and call the pain okay. Short facts and demons chased away. I always thought the angels stronger anyway. Despair was needed on that day. Like the darkness killed a little bit of light that made me stay. Blood turned black in some sacred way. The crying that we did somehow gave the end a place to lead us to. I need you forever. Can't get through this whole December. I remember without you. I need you forever. I may tell it to you differently today. You know that thing between us shouldn't go away. The light that moves through now and yesterday. Not either end of it, but a mist that makes no way to lead us through. I need you forever. Can't get through this cold December. I remember without you. I need you forever. I need you. I need you.
So this is the third moving related announcement I'll be giving this month. We're moving tomorrow. If you want to help, please do. Also, if you have a truck, that would be super, because we found out you can't rent like moving trucks after 5 o'clock. They just close and you can't move in the evening. So either we have to adjust and try to move during the day, or no, there's a fee on it that I don't want to pay. So, do you have a suggestion for a place? I would never experienced that. Okay. Okay, I'll look into it. Anyway, if you want to help us, because whether or not you have a truck, we still need help, because I haven't worked out in like 2 years, so I can't lift anything.
Two guys in a truck. No, I'm not kidding. That is the name of the company. A friend of mine uses it. They're very respectable. I don't know what they charge, but they did a good job of moving most of the heavy things throughout her apartment that she couldn't handle moving, and did it, pretty well. How much they charge, I don't know, but they are a local company and good work that I've seen.
Okay. Well, anyway, thank you for suggestions, but also if you want to help, let me know, because, yeah, it's not going to go well if it's just me. Right. I think so.
Hey, we have done this style of announcements for a long time, and tonight is your chance to say thank you to it, as we like to do around here. And now it's going away. Next week's announcements are going to be laid out in a totally different format, with categorized differently and all kinds of things. So,
Wait, will those still be pop-ups?
no, there aren't going to still be pop-ups. There's going to be, as there always have been, if you want to announce something, then you got to get that in ahead of time.
Was there a
Nope,
vote?
there wasn't, interestingly. So, there will be a very clear way for you to have to include your announcements in the announcements thing. But the biggest reason for the change is that, and so you're going to see this more at the 5 o'clock and the 7, we're trying to rearrange a little bit how the time is used, especially at 5 o'clock, because there are, I heard in a meeting this afternoon, 92 children in this community.
Wow.
92. Which means we have to start thinking newly about how we organize, especially around the 5 o'clock gathering. And some of that has to do with how the time is utilized. And because the time is going to be utilized in a particular way, that's going to affect the announcements that get put together, which is going to also play out in the other places the announcements show up. So all that to say, thank you. Cute little announcement sheet organized. Brian, if you click that, organized by days, which we will never see again, because it doesn't matter when something happens as much as what happens. So anyway, we won't even mention any of these tonight, because it's so, this week, yeah, it's so fascinating. But the regular things we do, and we're going to cluster all this together in a different way of making some announcements. So if you have important announcements coming in the next few weeks, keep your ears open to how you should announce those, or how you should get those ready so that people can keep up on them, short of the stand up and give verbal announcements, or in addition to giving verbal announcements.
That was after the sermon.
Oh. Oh, what? Wait.
No,
No, we
we're doing the
changed
same
it.
thing as, same order as
Oh,
the 5.
okay.
Because I stayed. I changed everything.
This is a pop-up song.
See the F, man. See the F.
This is my first experiment in songwriting of putting some poetry that I really love to music. I don't know if you resonate with the Sufi mystic Rumi, but he wrote a lot of beautiful things.
Just thought that was your words. I was like, wow, these are good.
You that love lovers, this is your home. Welcome. You that love lovers, this is your home. Welcome. In love for the door. So the vestibule, watch the dust screens moving in the light near the window. Their dances are dance, their dances are dance. Watch the dust screens moving in the light near the window. Their dances are dance, their dances are dance. We rarely hear the inward music, but we're all dancing to it, directed by the one who teaches us the pure joy of the sun, our music master. You that love lovers, this is your home. Welcome. You that love lovers, this is your home. Welcome. In the midst of making form and love, may this form that melts all form with love for the door. So the vestibule, watch the dust screens moving in the light near the window. Their dances are dance, their dances are dance. Watch the dust screens moving in the light near the window. Their dances are dance, their dances are dance. We rarely hear the inward music, but we're all dancing to it, directed by the one who teaches us the pure joy of the sun, our music master. You that love lovers, this is your home. Welcome. You that love lovers, this is your home. Welcome.
I know we do stream of our gatherings, video stream, and we have we record them now. We weren't doing before. We're messing with the sound. It's starting to get a little bit better. So if you like some of the music, it ends up on there, and you can download the audio and then separate those into songs. I think there's a lot of money in selling music on the internet. That'd be kind of a big deal.
Or end up like late.
We read large sections of books of the Bible out loud, and we're reading the book of Mark. Mark is one of four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the way Mark tells the story is unique to the Gospel of Mark, not only in the content, but maybe, and perhaps more importantly, in the structure of how it's put together. It's put together in these little collections of stories. And I think they matter a lot. I think the way the stories are put together are intentional. So we're going to see 4 stories tonight. Maybe you could see it as 5 that are meant to, I think, by the curator of the story, Mark, curator of the Gospel, Mark, meant to be understood together. So there's a reason that these 4, or you could call it 5 stories, sit in there together. They're meant to interpret one another, to inform one another, to be heard together. It's sort of like someone who's into foods and wines the way Corey is, would pair a particular wine with an entree, and a different wine with a dessert, and a different wine for the after dinner drink. That it's, they're meant to be in harmony with one another. Brian, I can't get this to go forward, and I see that that is blinking there, and I don't know why this isn't moving forward. So part of what I'm doing in the layout of this, as I put together the reading of chapter 3, is to point something that in Tuesday night at the discussion group I thought was a big deal. I don't know if it is or not, but I thought it was. And that is that there are 4 or maybe 5 places that the book of Mark chapter 3, as we call it, or the pericope set, lays this out. It's going to first say Jesus returned to the synagogue, and then Jesus went to the lake, and then Jesus went up on the mountain, and then Jesus went into a home. And each of those tells a different story, and they relate to each other. In fact, I think story 1 and story 3 are connected, and story 2 and story 4 are connected. And Mark has laid this out in this particular style and particular way. So I chose to break out on the slides for the reading, sort of as the introduction to each of these stories, the first line of them, which is Jesus went to the synagogue, and then Jesus went up to the lake, and then Jesus went to the mountain, and then Jesus went into a home. And I think that Mark said that on purpose, and it's worth pointing out. So I structured it that way. So as we read, if you want to read just the line about where it happened, you're welcome to do that. Or if you want to read also then the next line, you're also welcome to do that. So this one starts reading like this.
A man with a withered hand was there. Wanting to bring charges against Jesus, they were watching Jesus closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Step up where people can see you." Then he said to them, "Is it legal on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they said nothing.
Looking around at them with anger, deeply grieved for unyielding hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he did, and his hand was made healthy. At that, the Pharisees got together with the supporters of Herod to plan how to destroy Jesus.
So this is story 1, right? It's Jesus is in the synagogue, and these arguments break out. We read this one last week. These arguments break out with the religious leaders in the synagogue about what should happen on the Sabbath. And they want to kill Jesus by the end of it. All right, so then we go to story 2.
Jesus left with his disciples and went to the lake.
And as Tim pointed out in the discussion group on Tuesday, that's like a Minnesota colloquialism for, he had a place at the lake. So we think Jesus had a lake home.
A large crowd followed him because they had heard what he was doing. They were from Galilee, Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and the area surrounding Tyre and Sidon. Jesus told his disciples to get a small boat ready for him so the crowd wouldn't crush him. He had healed so many people that everyone who was sick pushed forward so that they could touch him. Whenever the evil spirit saw him, they fell down at his feet and shouted, "You are God's son," but he strictly ordered them not to reveal who he was.
It is a funny little story, isn't it? Out at the lake, and then what happens? Like all these people, and they're all into it, and then who declares him to be God's son? The evil spirits. Story 1, he's in the synagogue, and the religious leaders say, we need to put an end to this guy. Story 2, he's at the lake, and the evil spirits saw him without much detail, without the kind of detail that a decent editor would say to a writer in today's situation, like, could you stretch that out a little more, that last couple of sentences there? In what form did evil spirits say these things? But this gospel is not concerned with that. They fell to his feet and shouted, "You are the Son of God." Now, in this storyline, so far, it's not, what do you have for us? Don't do mean things to us. It is like a declaration. It's like a profession. It's like a statement of faith or something. If you hold that idea in your head, in a story coming down the line, the teachers of law are about to say that Jesus is actually consorting with demons and he's the head of them all. Well, maybe this is why they thought such a thing, because, you know, like they're saying nice things about him.
Jesus went up on a mountain and called those he wanted, and they came to him.
Story 3. Now he's up on a mountain, which might, to some of your minds, bring some reminiscence to things like Moses going up on the mountain and receiving something on the mountain in the commandments.
He appointed 12 and called them apostles. He appointed them to be with him, to be sent out to preach, and to have authority to throw out demons. He appointed 12, Peter, and then he gave Simon, James and John, Zebedee's sons, whom he nicknamed, I'm actually not sure how to pronounce that, Boanerges, sure, which means sons of thunder, and Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, Alphaeus' son, Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus.
Now, this is, you know, one of those great places where it's like the WWF or something, and people pick up these little nicknames. Sons of Thunder. It's just the greatest nickname ever. These two disciples named the Sons of Thunder. I don't know. You just, you know, this would be a great place to like ask, how did he get that nickname? Right? The two brothers. How did he get the Sons of Thunder? But these others also have these quirky little names, right? It tells you sometimes whose son it was. Zebedee's son and Alphaeus' son, and sometimes where someone is from, you know, he's from Canaan, and sometimes what did they do, and sometimes these other little nicknames. There's something about these names that I don't know what we do with them tonight, but again, it doesn't seem like it's just Mark just recording things. He's saying something. What struck me in the reading on Tuesday was, and I hadn't noticed this before, if you read these storylines together, in the story, second story, you have Jesus being called by these, the first story, he's being called, you know, that he's someone that the Pharisees, teachers of the law, and others need to be afraid of. And in the second story, you have Jesus being someone whom the evil spirits are saying these great things about. And then here he gives authority to throw out demons. We don't talk evil spirit language. We don't talk demon language, most of us in our world. Or if we do, we talk about it in like this other spiritual realm. But here in this whole thing, it seems somehow that that's just integrated as normal language. Like people with evil spirits say things, and then he gives authority over those, and so there's some kind of structuring that seems to be going on. All right, so the story goes on. We'll read all 4 of these, and then go on.
Jesus entered the house.
A crowd gathered again so that it was impossible for him and his followers to even eat. When his family heard what was happening, they came to take control of him. They were saying, he's out of his mind.
Fascinating, huh? This is where I've said that there were maybe 4 stories or 5. If you take this as a separate story, then you'll be 5. If you take this as one story, it'll be 4. So I'm wanting to think of it as one story.
The legal experts came down from Jerusalem. Over and over they charged, he's possessed by Beelzebub. He throws out demons with the authority of the ruler of demons.
All right, so now this big story gets set up with this, right? These people come down from Jerusalem, and they're making this claim that he's possessed by Beelzebub, which, you know, I guess if you study sort of a certain kind of cultic system would say Beelzebub is the most powerful of all of the demons, sort of the legion head, the head of all of them, this kind of thing, if you're into those names. To my experience, I remember the first time I read this as a teenager, newly into Christianity, because I didn't have any Christian background, but I did watch Happy Days, and knew that when Mork from Ork was introduced as a character on Happy Days, soon to have his own show called Mork and Mindy, that when Mork got out of the shell, he said, Beelzebub. And I remembered that phrase and that sound, and then when I saw it in here, I'm like, hey, that's the thing that Mork from Ork said, which I don't think has any connection to anything, but it was sort of this bigger thing where he's the head of all of the demon. He throws out demon with the authority of the other rulers of demons. So when you start to see the evil spirits fall down his feet and say, you're the Son of God, then he goes up on the mountainside and says to his disciples, you have the power to throw out demons. then they now have to say, well, see, he's consorting with demons. It might be that Mark is using demon language not as wanting to launch us into Neil T. Anderson's spiritual warfare categories, but rather as a means of explaining the other powers and forces in the world. And so he's using these as these larger categories of explanation. But anyway, the story's going to go on. It goes on like this.
When Jesus called them together, he spoke to
Okay,
them.
I'm sorry, Sarah. I need to straighten up what I just sort of sent us off track. This all comes as one thought. The legal experts come down from Jerusalem, and over they charge, he's possessed by Beelzebub, he throws out demons with the authority of other demons. Then this next is right in connection with that. I broke this up in an unfortunate screen break, so it might make you think they're two separate thoughts. They're not. So they make this claim, and then, okay, now Sarah, sorry.
When Jesus called them together, he spoke to them in a parable. How can Satan throw Satan out? A kingdom involved in civil war will collapse, and a house torn apart by divisions will collapse. If Satan rebels against himself and is divided, then he can't endure. He's done for.
Now he's going to keep going in this quote, and you're going to have to make a decision, as every reader does. When does the parable stop? When does it stop being a parable and become something else? You'll see in the next slide where you have to make that sort of decision. So now he's still talking.
No one gets into the house of a strong person and steals anything without first tying up the strong person. Only then can the house be burglarized.
Some people want to put the parable break right there, others keep it going.
I assure you that human beings will be forgiven for everything, for all sins and insults of every kind. But whoever insults the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. That person is guilty of a sin with consequences that last forever. He said this because the legal experts were saying he's possessed by an evil spirit.
Now that sentence has caused 12-year-olds and theologians for centuries to be in a panic. One way of reading this is, see, God does have a big but. The big but in the grace of God is, you can do anything, but not that. I would do anything for love, but not that. Meatloaf, as everyone should at least once a week. This becomes a really, this is one of the great passages that people are like, what do you do with the unpardonable sin? One way to read this is, look, God just has a list. At some point, you push far enough, you can do a lot of things, but don't do that. And if you do that, then that's it. Game is over, grace of God doesn't extend, that's it. So do whatever you have to do to not do that. And if you don't want to fall off a cliff, the advice goes, don't walk toward the edge. So figure out whatever that is, insulting the Holy Spirit, and don't get anywhere near it.
Which is so cool because we can't figure it out. How do you know if the Holy Spirit insulted or not?
So one could read, see, people that want to overextend the grace of God, Jesus warned people about not doing that. Or, there's another way to read this, which, and you want to throw out your theory from Tuesday night, which I found quite
It's a theory, I made it up, but
it's right, I think.
it might be. Because this whole passage is very contextual. Jesus is responding to a specific accusation. These experts in the law are specifically accusing him of, being in truck with Beelzebub and demons. And at the end of the whole thing, it reminds us that, he's saying all this because of these accusations. So I theorize that, he gives this parable to explain how it can't possibly be he's in truck with demons. And then the last part, he's saying he's responding specifically to the teachers of the law. They've just sinned and insulted against Jesus because they're accusing him of terrible things. And he kind of reassures them and says, I assure you, you people who are saying these terrible things about me, all human beings everywhere will be forgiven for all sins and insults of every kind, just like what you said just now. But don't keep doing this. There are spiritual consequences if you do this in, in the kingdom to come, in light of the Holy Spirit. So he's forgiving his accusers and then warning them that they're in a bad place. He's not saying that you're going to hell now.
And I want to throw out one other way one could read this, and that is that Jesus is saying to the people around him, and Mark, the commentator, wants to add into this, oh, this is why he's saying this, what they just did isn't that big of a deal. Don't worry about it. He's in doing this by the power of Beelzebub. Jesus says, look, that's not that big of a deal. People are going to do that kind of thing. That's forgivable. That sort of thing happens. The bigger problem, like Jesus saying something like, don't worry about the person that can kill your body. Worry about the person that kills your soul. So don't worry about all that insulting of every kind. It's not a big deal. The bigger problem is that the Spirit of God is up to something in the world. And if you're not part of that in this age or in the next age, so I think we should understand something like forever, then you never get out from under the consequences of it all anyway. So there's a better story to this than who insults who and should you be forgiven. I mean, if you can sort of imagine how you're supposed to hear this, like he's around, he's in this house, they're talking about all this stuff, and they're like, you are a partner with Beelzebub. You're like the leader of all the demons. He's like, even that's not a big deal. Because there's this other thing going on. And I think Jesus stays in parable all the way to the end. So I think we should understand this as he spoke to them in parable and finishes in parable with, that person is guilty of a consequence that lasts forever because they never get out of the system. So he's not breaking parable after burglarize and now giving people a real big warning like, they just did what I hope none of you ever do. I think it's just the opposite of that. Don't even be concerned that even that, what they just did, that you think is such a big deal, it's not. It's not what this is about. Dan, what do you think?
This might be similar to what you and Adam's saying, but my general understanding is that the consequence of deciding what, well, okay, first of all, I put Jesus in the narrative of the prophets. The prophets of Israel are always persecuted because they're believed to be evil, and Jesus, the prophet, is being led by the Holy Spirit, like a good prophet is. So they are saying what you're doing is evil. The consequence of that is, if you say what God is doing is evil, then you've painted yourself in a corner. You can't. There's no rest for you. So the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is contextually, it looks like a logical issue of deciding.
Lots of ways people have to figure out lots of things about that. I just don't think Jesus breaks script and says, boy, I thought there were things, but what those guys just did right there, that, like, I've just come with a new set of boundaries. Doesn't seem to make any sense. And it seems like Mark wants to say, well, he said this because they're saying he's possessed by an evil spirit is kind of a big deal. Now, and then the story doesn't end there, right? So staying in this fourth or fifth story, he's still in the house, then this thing happens, this next bit, which I find interesting. And I think we're supposed to understand all of this, all of these narratives together. So then here's the final part of the story. Remember back when we were back here and it said, a crowd gathered saying it was possible for him to get in. When the family heard what was happening, they came to take control of him, for they were saying he's out of his mind. That's the start of that story, right? Which starts with Jesus enters a house. The family comes. Then this little introduction of the Satan business, possessed by Satan, now back into this story, still in the house. So Mark like inserts that little exchange about Beelzebub and the consequences that last forever inside the story of he's in a house and he's the people of his family came to take control of him because they were saying he's out of his mind. And we'll be careful, Susie, not to insult the mother. Because all mothers are concerned, as they should be. All right, so now we're back into this end of that story.
Is mother and brothers arrived. They stood outside and sent word to him, calling for him. A crowd was seated around him, and those sent to him said, "Look, your mother, brothers, and sisters are outside looking for you." He replied, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" Looking around at those seated around him in a circle, he said, "Look, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother, sister, and mother."
Interesting, huh? What's being formed here? He's clearly not part of the synagogue structure. They want to kill him. He's clearly not a part of the community of demons and Beelzebubers, because that doesn't make any sense. He's clearly not counting the sins of people up and just keeping track of them. So I read that. And now he's not just part of the familial structure. It's almost like Mark wants to put these four together, from synagogue to lake to mountain to house, to say in all of those situations, Jesus is making another system. So if you read the Gospel of Mark as, how is it in the first centuries did Christianity spread as much or as little as it did? What was that about? How connected to the other systems was it? And there's a way to look at all of this that would be, well, he's created a populist movement, he's created a changing synagogue movement, he's created a new legal movement by the 12 tribes represented by the 12 apostles, or now in this one he's creating a new familial kind of movement. All of these get scary. All of these are very provocative things. And I think that Mark rushes them all together. 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when we started Mark and we said, what do you already know about it? Do you remember? Susie said something in that gathering about what she remembered about it. Do you remember what you said?
I remember.
Anybody remember what Susie said? Anybody remember what Susan said, or that song?
Yes, I do.
Which moment song? Susie said, the book of Mark is kind of famous because it moves really quickly. Remember, it's always full of like these immediate, like it's got this fast pacedness to it. I think one of the reasons that people have remembered the book of Mark being a book that goes fast, first of all, it's short. It's the shortest of all the Gospels. But also because you read one chapter, which we read tonight, and it does all of that. Right? One chapter rushes all this stuff together. But I don't think it's because Mark is in a hurry and wants to show that Jesus is rushing through things. I think it's because Mark is telling these stories that to our modern day mind feel like they're 4 or 5 stories. But to Mark, the curator of the book of Mark, this all feels like one idea. We saw the movie The Life of Pi last night. If you've read that book or seen that movie. I don't want to be a spoiler alert or anything, but to see The Life of Pi and then to hear this kind of narrative being told, there's a big point in that movie in which the story is being told and one of the people in the movie is encouraged to think about which story they like better. And he picks a story. And that's sort of how this feels. This feels like there's a reason that this story is told with these 4 or 5 things together. And our tendency, and I don't want to speak for all of you, but the tendency of 20th and 21st century Christians and modern day theologians and Bible paying attention to people in printed versions of the Bible is to pull each of these stories out into their own meaning. So what was happening in the story where Jesus heals the man with the hand on the Sabbath? What's the meaning of the story of all the people at the lake and the not telling the demon or the evil spirits not to tell who he is? What's the meaning of that story? And then, well, how come he appointed those people on the mountain? What's that story about? And then, what's the story about the Spirit or the Holy Spirit and the unpardonable sin? What's that story about? And then, what's the story about like his family thinking he's crazy? What is that story about? And Mark would be like, that's all one story. Those are meant to be, like, if you're going to understand that thing about the synagogue, you should understand it with the thing that happened at the house. Like, it's a different way to organize, and that's why this notion of the Gospel of Mark being put together in these, like, pericope sets become interesting, that they're commenting on one another. Because what all of us will tend to do in our modern day reading is we will say things like, oh, well, the other place in one of the Gospels where it has that story, it says it like this. So then we'll say, well, let's understand it in context of maybe how the other stories position that one. So we did that on this Tuesday or maybe the Tuesday before, I can't remember. Like we tried to look up other versions of this story in other Gospels to see how it's said, right? That's a very typical way for us to want to do it. Where Mark would be like, oh, no, these four, what you think are 4 disparate stories or 5 disparate stories, they're actually meant to be understood as verses of the same song, not different pieces. And that makes all of this very intriguing. How it starts with, we should kill him, you're the Son of God, you're in cohorts with the demons, you can cast out demons, you've now done something that's unforgivable. Who's my family? Who's my father? Who's my mother? Who's my sister? Who are my brothers? Really interesting way to think about what you should think about when you think about these stories, right? So, not to be overly postmodern narrative about the whole thing, but a big question we should always ask ourselves is when we're thinking about something, what are we using to think about the thing we're thinking about? To sort of step back for a moment and say, what informs this? And in this narrative, it seems like all of those stories are supposed to inform one another. Or, I don't know, maybe they're not. But I don't think you can read, at a minimum, you can't read the whole Beelzebub and unpardonable sin thing without the paragraph before it being, when his family came and said he was out of his mind, Beelzebub, unpardonable sin, then his family shows up and calls him out. Like it's literally right in the middle of that. Even if you don't want the other 3 stories to be influencing it, for whatever reason, it seems to me you really ought to at least see who's my father and who's my mother, or who's my mother, why do I say father? Who's my mother and who's my brothers? It's interesting there's no father in there, isn't it? Is somehow connected with this. Because he's dead, that's why.
The father, I think he died,
Yeah, probably just doesn't sound well when, yeah. I don't know. All right, thoughts on this? Anything more? Yes?
The picture of Jesus that's been shown to us so far in Mark is very different, I think, from what the other Gospels tell us.
What do you see in this picture?
I see a much more angry, a much more active. I mean, if his family thinks that he's out of his mind, he really must be doing extraordinary things. And I think that the way that Mark tells the story really gets us more in touch with the real human side of Jesus. You know, like, for example, in Luke, he never seems to get angry, he never seems to get frustrated, he's just kind of peaceful throughout. And in this one, he really seems like he's angry and he's frustrated and he's, you know, calling out the Pharisees and saying, hey guys, what should I do here?
Interesting. Anyone else? Yeah.
A good question to ask is, what is Jesus up to? What is it he's trying to accomplish here with these acts that he's doing and the things he's saying? And if you didn't know better, you would wonder if he wasn't trying to dismantle the Judaism of his time, so much to the point where in some other place in the Bible, Jesus would have to say, it might look like that, but I haven't really come to do away with the law of Moses, I've come to fulfill it. But he's causing trouble in the established replace all that. That's why we're Christians and we don't
Yeah.
really worship the way Jewish people do or used to worship. But when we're engaging with these stories, there isn't a Christianity like that anymore that's done away with Jewish traditions. Jesus is a practicing Jew who keeps the festivals, keeps the Passover, goes to synagogue, goes to temple and does the stuff. But at the same time, it seems like, he's up to something that is different than this system that Moses set into play like thousands of years, or 1,500 years before this. And now it's come to this kind of not working so well system. Which then makes me also wonder about, the context of writing these gospels post-destruction of the temple. We don't really have a place to go to sacrifice animals to get your sin forgiven. So I think my big question is, what is it that Jesus is up to? Is he inside of Judaism and subverting it? Is he announcing all of this is just going away and there's a new thing that I'm bringing, but it's still kind of hidden in the veil? Because Christians still can't really quite come to terms with if this system that Moses set into effect is now not in effect, what is this new thing that Jesus has established?
I had lunch Friday with Rabbi Joseph, and realized Joseph, who's our rabbi around here, is working on this big new way of thinking for him that he calls the word "in" is important here, in the absence of Jews. How does somebody live in the absence of Jews? So, because they're not around, how do you then live and talk? And do you live and talk differently than if they were around? Might not be unlike somebody who thinks about, how do we live in this land in the absence of native peoples? Like, they're not here, and we are all here, and we name roads like Minnehaha and Hiawatha. As this little reminder, oh yeah, they used to be here, but they're not here, or they're kind of just like over Little Earth. But they're not here, so do we recognize that we're living in the absence of that? So there's this whole thing about, like, how do you live in the absence of Jews, knowing that they're somewhere but they're not here? So does that have any meaning, right, for you? And it got me thinking when we started talking a lot about the Bible, like, maybe that's some of what was going on. Destruction of the temple, Jews spread all over, people coming into the Jesus narrative who aren't Jewish, they're not with Jewish people, so now they're trying to say, how do we live in the absence of the Jewish life and tradition, and how do we make sense of any of this when we're not living in that context? So not only do you have to think, as Timothy, you're bringing up, like, how do you think about what Jesus was actually up to, but how do you think about what the people who put the stories together were thinking about what had happened? They're not in a Jewish system anymore. So do you have a Jesus that can make any sense in both a Jewish context and not in a Jewish context? And maybe that's why something like, well, who is my father, or who is my mother? There, I do it again. Who is my mother and my brothers and my sisters? Who are they? Anyone who does the will of God. Sounds really different in the absence of Jewish culture than it does when you're in the midst of it. So it starts to have this other kind of storyline, right? Which then we say, yeah. So what Jesus are we thinking of when we hear these kinds of things? You think, Tim? Is that similar to what you're?
Exactly. Yes.
All right.
I'm also interested in finding out what people think Jesus is up to.
Yeah. Last word?
At work, we talk a lot about policy, system, and environmental change as a way to create systematic change. Like the way you change a bad system is through changing policies and environments through systems. And I see a lot of that through the different things that Jesus does. And so talking about the legal experts coming down and sort of responding to what they do as a policy change, and talking about personal actions of this is who is forgiven and this is what you should do as an environmental change. And like looking at it as this is how you change a system. He does very specific things in each of like the PSE changes.
So he goes, as I said, a storyline, then he establishes these new people, and then he, I don't know, whatever this would be, and then he,
Yeah. So you kind of work on policy, and then you work on how the system works within itself, and then you work on the environment and how people interact with that.
interesting. Like, yeah, hearing the gospel, I mean, what happens to somebody, right, is whatever you got going on in your head and how you're working, what you're doing, becomes this new lens by which you start to hear this stuff. Isn't it interesting, right? So you hear it in these new ways, which might be why we have to have new ways of hearing things, and not just hearing new things, right? That's the fascinating thing about stuff like this. We've read this a couple times as a community. We're different people now with a different lens for how you read this. And so it lays in differently. And the other Gospels don't lay it out in exactly the same way. So they have a different system. All right, anybody else? Anything to say?
I still don't get the part about insulting the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven, and I'm okay with, still having that question unanswered. I guess I'd like to understand it because at this point in my journey, I feel like God's love is so big and so great that God really would forgive anything and everything. And I feel like even, like I get, as I walk through life and if I feel the rhythms of grace and I resist them, or I hear the song of love and I refuse to dance to it, like there's going to be turmoil within me, like there's going to be kind of a suffering I brought up on myself. But I still think God would forgive me. I still think God forgives and just keeps on forgiving, because I think that's what God calls us to do, and I think it's just healthier for God, for God's own sake to just forgive, even if someone doesn't forgive.
There are people who say, replace the word forgiveness, especially in a Reformed and perhaps a certain kind of Augustinian and Anselmian tradition of having wronged God in a judicial sort of way for which God's feelings were hurt, and instead think about that as freedom from bondage. So forgiveness isn't you hurt someone and they should grant you forgiveness or pardon from that, but it's freedom from bondage. So if one reads this, I assure you that everyone will be freed from bondage for everything, for every sin and insult of every kind. But whoever insults the Spirit of God will be strapped in bondage forever, and that will have consequences that will go on and on. To some people, that's just enough to be like, oh yeah, this is not about, is God mad at me? Or as Corey brought up at the podcast, am I somehow a shameful individual before God because God is so sickened by what I did? But rather it's about, is someone held in bondage? And that, not in the, sort of current sexual sense of bondage, but in this sense of like the bondage from the nation of Israel, right? I just bring it up because everywhere else that I hear the word bondage, it's like safety word stuff, right? But in this, it's about the nation of Israel. The big metaphor is you were in Egypt as slaves, and then God forgave you and set you free to enter the promised land. So forgiveness meant pardon in that sense. You've been set free from the prison. That kind of, the unpardonable, like we think about it pardoning like that, as opposed to in an interpersonal sense of forgiveness. Does God forgive like a person would forgive? That kind of thing. That can really change the thinking and meaning on this to be like, oh, this is about do you get free from the bondage or not? And to some people that's enough. To others it's not, because whatever that's more potent than that little explanation.
It's helpful. I just wonder if there will be a time where there could even be redemption for like Beelzebub or whoever.
Jews.
Well, yeah, and that's what this story. See, right. Because because in these stories, if you have the unpardonable thing, but then you have the evil spirits being like, "You're the Son of God," and Jesus like, "Hey, keep that between us." that really changes even that notion of who the evil ones are. So, all right. Anybody else need to fix any of that? I don't like having the last word and stuff.
I always, on that consequences to sin,
Yeah.
I always saw that as, well, how could there be a wrathful God if there's a consequent, a domino effect to your sin? You know what I mean? It just happens naturally, consequence, instead of God being this almighty, you sin, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
It's like it's built in. I don't know.
So it's, you were seeing as more the natural consequence of something rather than the smiting of the hand of God. Well, you should probably sing a little bit.
He said, remind me, I'm at home with my sorrow. Yet all my lives, they're left with my friends. Well, is it hard waking up to tomorrow? Is there something that won't let you go? Just make me hollow. It's only just that this be my end. And you say that you can give a new day and erase my shame. We can start anew. We can make it all up again. We can make it through. We can get it all unstuck again.
try to end with two blessings. One we say to each other while holding hands, and then we sing to each other. So, we stand and do that? So some people look at the screen, some people like to look at somebody else, some just want to hear it, some want to say it, so anyway you do it. May the God of hope fill you with all